Welcome to Vancouver Carpenter. Today I'm going to show you guys the easiest way to do a patch. Now this is not the fastest way to do a patch, and this is not necessarily the most professional way to do a patch, but this is going to be the easiest and simplest way for anybody who's never done a drywall patch to do. And for anyone who's never cut drywall before, it's pretty straightforward. You just make a small line in the drywall, and once it has this score mark, it snaps. So it's really easy to cut. But anyways, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this piece, I'm going to put it right here, and I'm going to really gently score this with a knife. You could also draw it with a pencil too, because there's a possibility you could do this too small by accident. I'm making sure to go a little bit bigger than this piece of drywall. Careful not to cut yourself. All you need to do is just score the paper. You're not trying to cut through it in one go. So it's hard to see my outline right now, but now I'm just going to follow through with my cuts. And I'm just pushing a little bit harder on each one. Careful not to go past. Not the end of the world if you do, but you know, better if you don't. So sometimes I'll stop there and I'll start again from the bottom just to make sure I don't slash too far. Although I've said it, so who knows, maybe I've jinxed myself. My videos tend to go that way. Okay, now I can kind of start to push on this. So you could use a drywall saw to do this, or you could just, you know, keep pushing until you know you're actually through this one like that. But once you're able to break it, then you can just cut the paper on the back. Pretty easy. But remember, just take it easy, don't push too hard and cut yourself. It really sucks. Most of us in the trades have done that once. Let me know in the comments. Getting there. Okay, I've got all the loose paper out, and I've got solid drywall all the way around. The next thing I'm going to do is install some plywood backing. So you can see it's about 1.5 inches longer than the hole itself. So you just put that up here and down here. So make sure to overlap it about 1.5 inches or 1 inch. I prefer to use plywood because it doesn't split when you put screws into it. As for screws, you want 1.25 inch drywall screws, coarse thread drywall screws if you're going into wood. So I put one screw right down here. How far to sink it is really important. Let's get into that. It needs to go just far enough that you can't hear it, but not so far that it tears the paper. If you send it so far through that it tears the paper, the screw isn't holding properly and it could blister. I'm gonna put one more screw up here. And I usually like to put one on the edge right here. Hopefully my wood's wide enough. Just, but that's also why I like plywood. If this was a 1x and I was only grabbing a little bit of the meat there, it would just split the wood. This is 3/4 ply. 1/2 inch ply is actually the best because it takes up the least amount of space in the wall. Same thing, screw here, screw here, screw here, a little more, and now my piece fitting nice and snug. One thing I could have done when I was marking out the hole is I could have gone like this, and then that way I would have known which way to orient the board, but it was still the same way I had it last time. This part's pretty straightforward. The patch is only about 6x6 or even 5x5, so only needs 4 screws. One thing you need to look for is that all the drywall is solid, so that there's no loose chunks and blisters all around your edges. So this one actually has this big blown out chunk right here. And that's going to cause a blister. So that's a little bit unfortunate that I have that massive gap now, but it's not the end of the world. Next, we're going to use just fiberglass mesh tape. And I know I've gone on and on in other videos about how good paper drywall tape is, and it really is the best, but for a small little 6x6 patch like this, you can get away with using mesh tape and not have any problems. In fact, you can use mesh tape on a lot of things and not have any problems, but there are some stipulations. I have other videos about that. Check out my mesh versus paper tape video if you're interested in finding out what the differences are. So I just hold my knife like this and pull upward to tear it. It's really quite easy, but that might be challenging for you at first. So you can also cut this with a knife or with scissors. I'm trying not to overlap it, just to keep the build out to a minimum. For me, that wouldn't be a problem. I could overlap this about 3 layers and cover it pretty easily. But for somebody who is inexperienced, the less overlap, the better, because then you're gonna not have to build it out so far. Okay, so that's all done. And now I have some all-purpose mud. This is all-purpose heavyweight. All-purpose light would also be adequate. And so what I'm going to do is I'm not actually worrying about building this out too much yet. I'm just embedding the tape. Again, this is the easiest way to do it, not the most professional. So what I'm suggesting you guys do is just put a thin skim over top of the mesh tape. This spot needs a little bit extra mud because it's a bit shallow. But anyways, it's a thin skim, and push lightly so that you're not sliding the mesh tape all around. You may see that some of the fibers like this get a bit loose. You might have to pull them off or cut them. But again, I'm just embedding the tape. I'm going to feather my edges. So what that means is I'm pushing down on the blade like this. I'm like putting pressure on it, feathering my edge so I don't leave any big lumpy spots to have to sand. I'm doing it in a sequence. So it is from the left, I angled it like that, and then I'm going to angle it like this a little bit. Now I'm actually wiping it too much for no good reason, so I'm going to leave it. But the sequence is like this, and then pass like this, like this, like this. Now I'm going to leave this and let this dry. So this has had a chance to dry overnight. Now there's a couple of things that I forgot to get into. So one of them is knife size. So the first one I used was just a 5-inch knife. You could use a 5, 6, 8-inch knife. It really doesn't matter for that first little bit where you're just embedding the tape. But for this next coat, I'm going to be using a 10-inch knife, which is a lot more handy. That way we're just going to do a couple of passes over this and it's going to cover really nicely. The other thing is the consistency of your drywall mud. So what you can do is you can just put your drywall mud straight out of the bucket into a pan and then just add a little bit of water and just kind of move it around until it gets thinned down a little bit, until it's fairly consistent. So this one's a little bit wet. It's dripping and you want it a tiny bit thicker than that. But on the other hand, it's kind of easy to work with, except it gets a bit messy. Anyways, let's take a look at this patch and get to the second coat. As we can see, there's some really basic tool lines, a big crack here from the drywall mud shrinking where the liftoff was, and it got a little bit fuzzy right here when I messed with it that one time. That's why I didn't mess with it much, because otherwise the tape starts getting all messed about. So I just put the mud on and then left it. It's also flat enough that it doesn't really need to be scraped. And what I really don't want to do is start trying to scrape it and then just like get the tape all fuzzed up again. So now what we're going to do is cover this. And I want to make sure that I really get it covered almost into the corner here. So I'm going to start about 6 inches above the start of the patch. And this is just some gooey, like I said, pretty wet all-purpose. I'm not going to be able to get this looking really good in one patch. You want to be going for like, you know, roughly a small 1/8, so big 1/16 of an inch over top of that tape. If you don't know what that means, well, maybe it's 3/32. I'm staying away from that corner. Oh, chunks. I'm just getting a nice even spread here, making sure that it's consistent all the way along. So now what I'm going to do, it looks like I may as well just go right out to the corner here. So now it's time to feather the edges. So we're gonna start on this one first. So what that is just pushing really hard on the blade, like so. One down this side. Oh, we got more crumbs in the mud. I haven't been into this bucket for a little while. You know what? I'm just gonna leave that because we're gonna do another coat on this. Let's get that feathered. Bottom one feathered. And now we're just gonna pass down this a few times. Real gently, real quickly. And you know what? It may not look that pretty, but I've got enough mud on there and these are gonna get sanded off and it's gonna get skimmed one more time. So I'm gonna leave it like this. So again, what I did was pressure on the one side to feather, flatten it out, and then pressure on the other side to feather again. And that leaves most of the material here. So if you can still see your tape at this stage, there's not enough mud on here. So I always like to make sure that the tape is totally buried. It is now everybody's favorite time, sanding time. This has had overnight to dry. It's fully dry. And normally I would be using a nice flat sanding pole to sand this, but I'm gonna suffer along with the do-it-yourself crowd and just use a sanding sponge, because if you're just trying to patch one little hole in the wall, this is what I recommend. Don't go buying a big pole sander. One handy little tip is you can use your pan, push it up against the wall, and just sand really gently, and a lot of that dust is all just gonna fall into the pan. Also, I highly recommend wearing a mask, so when I'm done talking, I'm gonna go do that. But basically, just try and sand gently and relatively flat, like so you're not pushing too hard on any of your lines, just with a nice flat, steady hand. And you're just gonna go until these lift-offs, the lines, get smaller. Now that this is done, you can probably see that it's not perfect. Like, there's still some imperfections. So I didn't sand it down until it was totally flat. I just took off all the high spots. So this stuff is probably going to bubble like crazy as soon as it starts going on. Whenever you're doing a patch on a wall that has been previously painted, it loves to bubble over all the parts that aren't new drywall. So there will be one square where it doesn't bubble too bad, and that is the new chunk of drywall, and all the rest of it is gonna bubble like crazy. So there's a trick to getting around that. Well, there's not really any getting around it. It's double the work. You gotta skim it twice, basically. So I'm just loading all the mud on here. And now what I'm going to do is I'm gonna pull off everything I just put on. And you know, when you haven't been mixing your mud for a while, you get chunks in the mud. Anyways, I'm gonna go in this direction actually, and I'm pulling it off really hard. So what this is doing is it's filling all these pinholes. Let's get a look up close. So you can see those. I mean, that's just a nightmare right there. Hate that. And then as we go up here, we've got just this one spot where I'm working on filling them in. But it's getting better, and there's those bigger holes that were left that still need to be filled in. Alright, let's get back to this. I'm gonna go up. So the reason I'm going up is a lot of the time when you put the mud on in one direction and take it off in the other direction, that can help fill in the holes. So that it doesn't pinhole as severely. I have a little ding in my blade that's leaving a line, so I'm going to get some sandpaper and sand that out really quick. My tools may not have been handled as nicely as I like them to be recently, but I have nobody to blame but myself for that. That should take care of it. Okay, we're going to do another skim here. And on this one, We're actually going to try and leave some of the material on instead of wiping it all off so tight. The reason is, when you leave a little bit on, you leave this nice sanding coat, so that if there's any deficiencies in it, you can sand it out instead of having to fill it again at the touch-up stage, which there shouldn't be touch-ups for a little patch like this. Okay, I'm going to feather my edge at the bottom. Probably can't even see that, we've gone so wide. Feather the top edge. And now, again, we're going to do that series of passes like I talked about. Feathering on this side. Well, you know, when you got too many crumbs in the mud, it really doesn't help. We got some more bubbles here. Chunks of sand. Man, what is happening? Look at that. Okay. That was a lot of messing about, but I'm happy with it now. Oh, until I did that. Can you believe it? There we go. Now let's take a look at that. So that's where I feathered up into the paint. There's the patch. And it's all looking pretty smooth, except for some of those crunchies I had in the mud, but that'll all sand out real nice. Down there. You can see there's nothing but just lift offs. A couple of bubbles. I'm just going to live with those. Looking pretty good. This patch has had a chance to dry overnight, but I'm not 100% happy with it. Now, I'm going to give away one of my trade secrets to you guys. So I don't ever like to touch up drywall after I've sanded it. What can tend to happen is you sand the drywall and then you go and you put a touch-up on it, and then you try and sand that touch-up later and it leaves a ridge. So it like sands at a different consistency than the sanded mud. And so you can always see the outline where the patch is. How I like to avoid that is I actually do the touch-ups before I sand. So we are right up close now. And you can see, I mean, this is just hollow right here. So I know I'm gonna have to over sand it to get rid of that. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna put a little bit of drywall mud on here, and we're gonna do it real gently and quickly. So what I did is I was really careful to not compress the mud. So if I pressed really hard, then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna compress this patch. So this patch right here is gonna be harder than all the surrounding stuff because it gets super compressed by the knife. So you want to make sure you don't leave a thick amount on or a compressed amount on. Right here we got a bit of bubbles. I know these are going to cause me problems down the road. So I'm just going to really quickly scrape them to try and open up any of the ones that are sealed. Same thing. So of course I can't sand that right away, but what I can do is put a fan on it right away. Go do something for 10 minutes, come back and sand it. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the light, I'm going to shine it directly down the wall so that I can see everything. And now I'm going to get my mask on and sand away. And again, I'm going to tough it out with just the sanding sponge. See how long it takes. So now that I have my light though, I can see everything. So I'm not going to be over sanding anything. I also don't want to use the pan this time because I don't want to scratch the wall with it, rubbing it against it. I'm just going to go really slowly and gently, and the dust is all going to fall straight down. So I'm not pushing too hard, I'm not grinding the sponge in anywhere, I'm just going nice and flat and often in circular motions. It really helps to make a nice smooth patch. I use the angled part to get right into the corners. These angled sponges are the best. And even though this looks really good, I take care to make sure that I really blend those edges in. This spot is one of the biggest beginner mistakes. People leave this part heavy and you can clearly see the texture of the old wall and then the nice clean patch of the new wall. In this case, you're going to see it anyways because I haven't repaired the rest of the wall. Look at that. I often check with my hand because my hand can feel what the sanding sponge can't. Okay, one thing I'm definitely guilty of in my videos is not showing you guys the finished product. So, I got some primer here. It's almost as thick as the drywall mud I was using. Haven't opened this can in a long time. But we'll get some primer on here and take a look at the finished product and see how it is. So this is just a nice, I think this is bin 123 primer sealer. Great stuff. Anything I'm using in this, I will try to link in the description below if you guys are looking for it. Should help your life go a little easier using the same stuff I use. Well, it won't help your life, but it might help your patch. Get a nice thick coat on there. Nothing like a good coat of primer to lay a good foundation. Put the fan back on this, come back when it's dry. Happy with that? Okay, looking nice and dry. It only took about 5 minutes. This came out real good. The only defect I can really see is over here. It's like I could have spent a little more time sanding that edge, but that's really up close. Like, let's go way back here. I mean, it's small. But yeah, other than that, it's looking real sharp all around. This is actually probably one of the better patches I've done in a long time. Not that any of the patches I've done have been bad, but just slowing it down like that and sanding it by hand and having the light on it just helped me bring it up to that next level, you know, to make it way better than every other part of the wall. So now it's going to stand out because the rest of the wall looks like garbage and this part looks good. Well, that was, in my opinion, the easiest way to patch a hole in the wall. So I think for anybody who's never done this before, that's going to give you a pretty good idea of what you need to do to patch just about any hole in the wall, from, you know, like a fist size to a foot size. Also, I just want to give a huge thanks out to all of the subscribers and anyone who's been watching the videos over the last while. So it is right now 2020 January, and I generally don't like to date my videos by saying the dates, but right now I've recently had my wife break her arm, and so it's been a real struggle to put out videos, and a lot of you guys have been watching stuff over this last month, and it's been a huge help to us because I really haven't been able to work very much. I want you to know that it's not just me you're supporting. I have 4 kids that we're trying to raise the best we can. And so you guys watching the videos help support 6 people. So that is a huge help. Thank you very much to anyone who's been doing that. And I hope you have a fantastic New Year, or whenever this is. Maybe you're watching this in, you know, July of 2021, and none of that really matters. Except for the fact that, thank you. That does matter. So, until the next video, you guys, I really hope you're getting something out of these. Thank you for the support.